Well, we are back. This is Origins of Our Faith. My name is Rick Richardson. Today talking about the lost 10 tribes of Israel. Really going into some of the history of how they became lost, what prophecies say about in the future, how they will return, and what that all means. We talked about how Solomon did not follow God, and God said, I'm going to take the kingdom away from you. And then how Rehoboam, his son, really was responsible for that happening, although God had foretold that it would happen. And this kingdom split in two and existed as two separate kingdoms. Jeroboam, the king that was in the north over the house of Israel, decided to do a couple of things. And these things were directly against God. They were done so he could retain the power that he had and not lose the people as they began to wonder if they should not reunite with the house of Judah. It so happened, and we find this in 1 Kings 12 and verse 26, Jeroboam said in his heart, "Now the kingdom may return to the house of David." He didn't want to lose this power and this kingship that he had over the people from the nation in the north, the house of Israel, and knew that if they would reunite, if they would get together, if they would have fellowship with the southern kingdom, he was in danger of losing his power base. He said, "If these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, then the heart of the people will turn back to their Lord." So he said, I don't want these people following God. If they go back to Jerusalem, and if they take offerings to the temple there, and they have that as their place of worship, which God said, this is going to be the place. I'm going to place my name here, and this is where you need to worship me and bring the sacrifices. Well, Jeroboam said, if we do that, I'll lose the people. And so decided that he would do something else rather than lose all the people to Judah. He said, "Therefore the king asked advice and made 2 calves of gold. He said to the people, 'It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.'" Kind of reminiscent of what we find at the base of Mount Sinai when they were dancing before the golden calf. That he made 2 calves of gold, and he set them up and said, "Here are the gods who brought you out of the land of Egypt." And he set up one in Bethel and one in Dan. Now this thing became a sin for the people, and they went to worship before the one as far as Dan. He made shrines and high places and made priests of every class of people who were not from the sons of Levi. So the priesthood had to come from the Levites. Well, the problem was they didn't have many Levites. The Levites and the ones that they had, when they saw, well, he's not making us priests. We're not fulfilling our duty. We're not doing the things that God had instructed us to do. Many of them said, forget this, and they returned to Judah. And Judah eventually consisted of the tribe of Judah, of Benjamin, and of Levite. Of Levi. And so the Levites then all pretty much went back to the southern kingdom, and Rehoboam, or Jeroboam rather, made priests out of every sort of people. It didn't matter who they were. In fact, some of the lowliest people, as long as they had money to pay, became part of the priesthood. Jeroboam ordained the feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did at Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he had made. And at Bethel he installed the priest of high places which he had made. So he made offerings on the altar which he had made at Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month, in the month which he had devised in his own heart. And he ordained a feast for the people of Israel, and offered sacrifices on the altar, and burned incense. So this is something he decided to do. It says this is something he devised in his own heart. The nation of Israel was not, did not observe any really high days in the 8th month. They were in the 7th month. The 15th day of the 7th month is when the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Sukkot happens. Jeroboam moved that to the 8th month. In fact, even today, the Samaritans, who were transplants after the nation of Israel was removed and came back in, many of them still observe the Feast of Tabernacles or Sukkot a month later than what do most of the people in the land of Israel. So this is a tradition that is even carried through into modern times, but certainly at this time, Jeroboam didn't want to take any chances of losing the house of Israel and having them go back to Judah, the southern kingdom, and really lose the power that he had over them. So he changed the feast days, he changed the way that they worshipped, the place that they worshipped, and the days that they worshipped. Something that Israel was going to do quite a bit in its future. And what they really became and how they became a nation that was totally against God is an amazing story. Because here we have a people that God had chosen. And God said, I'm going to have you as my chosen people. And they were saved from slavery. And God brought them and put them into their own land. And yet, after they became a people, after they had a king or two, they said, you know what? We just don't want to do this anymore. Yeah, it doesn't matter all the miracles that had happened or the past that we have or all the things that we see around us. We want to do our own thing. And they rebelled, and they became really split into two separate nations. And again, these two nations existed together side by side, but very separate for 230 years. Now that's just about the length of time that the United States has been a country. You know, before that point, they were just colonists. Well, think back to the point of where you're thinking back to George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and all those people who signed the Declaration of Independence. Well, it's been that long, that's how long it's been, that the nation of Israel existed as a separate nation from the nation of Judah. But at the end of that period of time, they ceased to exist. The northern kingdom, the larger kingdom, the nation of Israel, became a nation that was lost to history. Now, why did God really make the nation lose its identity? After all, wasn't he just upset at Solomon for following other gods? And wasn't it just the mistake that Rehoboam made? Well, no, as we'll see in our next installment of Origins of Our Faith, not only did Solomon and Rehoboam disobey God and go in a direction they shouldn't have, so did the entire nation of Israel, the northern kingdom that didn't follow God and became not just a bad example, but a people that God was not at all proud to say, these are my people. We will talk about that on our next show. We will see you then when we return next time on Origins of Our Faith.